Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, January 16th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting. Happy New Year, everybody. Will the Director of Finance, Elizabeth Hollett, please call the roll?
Certainly. Honorable Mayor Tack.
Here.
Chairman Preschlack.
Here.
Alderman Novit is absent. Alderman Waldeck.
Present.
Alderman Notes.
Here.
Alderman Powers.
Here.
Alderman Goshgarian.
Here.
Alderman Weber.
Here.
Alderman Walther.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Our first item on the agenda is consideration of meeting minutes from our Finance Committee meeting held on November 13th, 2023. Does anybody have any comments or updates for the record? Okay, hearing none. Is there any voice vote required to approve those, or do we just move on? Voice vote, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Great. Okay, sorry. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Voice vote, please. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Hearing none, it's passed. Thank you very much. Our next item is Diane Hall. Diane, come on up. Thank you so much. Diane is going to give us an update on our grant program and has some slides to walk through that I think are a real testament to how the city has dug in to help offset the taxpayer financing for some of our infrastructure and other projects. Thank you, Diane.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Finance Committee. Tonight I will be presenting the 2023 Grant Program Annual Report. Just some background on the city's grant program. In January 21, City Council did approve a contract with the Ferguson Group. They are assisting the city with identifying grants and helping to review grant applications prior to submittals. And we also have a contract with Carasoft Technology to provide grant tracking software. This is our third annual report that we are presenting, and we will also be providing some program recommendations for 2024. Over the last 5 years, the city has been awarded $19.5 million in grants. This slide shows the different categories for which the grants have been granted. There's roads, bridges, COVID, police, fire, and just a variety of other allocations. Just some notable grant awards that we've had over the last 5 years, especially with the latest ones in 2023. We did receive for the Deer Path Streetscape $2.1 million. Additional funding for the Waukegan-Everett intersection for the property acquisition of $875,000, and Seminary Ravine for $959,000. This one is pending congressional approval through the appropriation process. And then out of the city's proposed CIP program for the next 5 years, there are $86.9 million in projects that are being proposed. And out of that $86.9 million, total grant funding is $16.5 million, or 19% of those projects. So the city's grant program is providing substantial funding to help provide additional capital projects. And just to compare the 2022 to the 2023 program, the city was provided 85 grant opportunities for consideration. The city did submit 11 applications. We did receive 6 awards. We still have 5 applications that we've submitted that are still pending review by the agencies. And we did receive $4.3 million in grants in 2023. So over the last 2 years, we've received $8.2 million in awards. So for the 2023 program goals, out of those goals, 6 grants were awarded. We have 1 that's still pending review or 2 that are pending review. 1 will be resubmitted after engineering design is complete. And there are 3 projects that have been identified that no opportunities have been found at this time. So for 2024 program goals, The staff does review the current CIP for the next 5 years to look for any projects that may have the opportunity for grant funding that we do provide to the Ferguson Group to help them better identify different grants for the city. We also like to emphasize projects that are in the CIP, not just grants to obtain grants. And we also would like to update the needs assessment, which is the Ferguson Group reaching out to the departments to really identify what they're looking for. And we also like to ensure that, projects have the design complete for the grant applications. That way we're shovel ready and it's more better looking for when we do submit those grants. And I would be happy to answer any questions on our program.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. I think that's a key point, the last item that you mentioned, shovel ready. I think we do a great job as a council and as a city having designs ready so we can take an opportunity to avail ourselves of the grant financing. So I just want to commend you on the process. And since I've been on the council, it's just increased every year exponentially. So it's a really, really good story. And thank you so much for the presentation and all your comments. And Alderman Goshgarian, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Preschlek. Diane, thank you for the presentation. It's very helpful and informative. Can you maybe share with us what our contractual obligations has been with the Ferguson Group, so it can probably shade a better light on what a good investment this is for us to have this working relationship with them, number one. And then number two, we've done a lot of stormwater management improvement over the last several years. Is there a trend, and I'm not sure if it's for you coming from the finance department, but do we see an overall trend going in another direction in terms of infrastructure improvements? And maybe you or maybe Director Cerniak or Thomas could share that with us.
Okay, so for the Ferguson Group, the City Council just awarded a contract, renewal of the contract, so it's $24,000 a year. We do have monthly meetings with them. They provide the different grants, and they do review of grant applications to make sure that they're competitive and it's a right fit for the city before making the applications.
That's great.
So for the storm sewer,
And really just looking more high level.
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. In general, yes, we are receiving grants for ravines, intersections, bridges. We're now starting to go after major roadways. So we just submitted an application last week for Wesley. The Wesleys, the Sheridans, the Green Bays, those are going to be costly, so we're looking for grant opportunities for those. But yes, we've been successful in those other categories. We're going to continue to push for those as well, as much as we can. But yes, if that answers your question.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Just a question I'm curious, is the funding coming from county, state, or the federal level, and approximately what percentage?
I'm not sure on the percentage, but we are receiving it from all different, between the federal and the county, state,
Okay.
Foundations even.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may jump in, just to piggyback on Director Thomas's comments, the council, I think, is aware, maybe it was 7-8 years ago, this city undertook a stormwater sort of engineering assessment, prioritizing the most severe needs within the community. We made such progress in working our way through that list that included tentatively in the upcoming FY25 capital improvement plan is round 2 of updating that study. So we've made such progress on that list that now we'll go back to the drawing board and reassess where our needs are. So not specific to grant funding, but just thought I'd acknowledge all the progress that's been made on the stormwater management front.
That's great. Any other questions or comments? Well, thanks, Diane. Again, I just feel like grants are ingrained in our culture on the CIP and our capital budgeting and planning, and it's just a great success. So thank you for all the hard work and working with Ferguson Group. Next item, Elizabeth Hollab is going to walk us through our investment program update and some recommendations for this upcoming year. Take it away, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Good evening, Finance Committee members. We'll provide you a little bit of information, background information on the city's current investment program. Then we're going to be making some recommendations for your consideration for '24. So just a little bit of overview. The city has a comprehensive investment policy. It was last updated in May of 2022. It does not include either the police and fire pension fund of the city or the cemetery funds, because those are managed externally by other boards and are not included in the city's investment program. The city's investment policy complies with the Illinois Public Funds Investment Act. Those are statutory restrictions on what the city can invest in. And so any changes in the Illinois Public Pension Funds Investment Act are followed through with changes to the investment policy as those changes are made. And then importantly are the three objectives in priority order for the city's cash and investment program. First and foremost is security of the assets and ensuring very low risk of loss. The second priority is liquidity, making sure that we have enough available cash for operating needs. And then thirdly, return on investment. The next slide here shows the authorized investment categories that are available to the city under the Illinois Public Funds Investment Act. What you will not see here are equity investments. So we are specifically prohibited from investing in the stock market or purchasing any type of equity investments. And so we are fairly limited in risk exposure, but we can invest in any of these categories. So with our investment policy under portfolio strategy, our investment policy dictates that the finance director will meet annually with the finance committee to consider two main components of the city's investment program. First is segmentation into liquidity and core, which determines what portion of the assets must remain in liquid cash and what can be invested. And then the benchmark confirmation and selection. In your quarterly investment reports, we provide benchmarks to give you an indication of how our performance compares to the market. This chart is a little busy, and it goes back to December of 2007, but it does show that generally the city's return on its cash and investments will mirror the Fed funds rate. So the gray bar on the chart over shows annual changes in the federal funds rate going back to December of 2007. The red line indicates the rate the city was earning on its deposits at that point in time as a comparison. And then the third line, the green line, is indicating the three-year Treasury note earning at that time. So what you can see is that we very much, through our banking agreement with Lake Forest Bank and Trust, will mirror and follow the Fed fund rate. And so what you can see is that we had a protracted period of time when the Fed fund rate was so low at 0 to 0.25%. The city was really not earning any money on its investments and had little opportunity to generate additional return because even the three-year Treasury note was not significantly higher. So as we came out of that very low interest rate environment, the finance department brought to the city council in 2017 a completely updated investment policy. We had been working with a 2004 investment policy, and we wanted to update it for changes in statutory requirements as well as the investment market. So that was approved by the city council in February of 2017, and a couple years later, in August of 2019, we brought to the city council a recommendation to use eConnect Direct. That's an online platform for investment purchases. It is through multi-bank securities, and we received city council approval to use that vehicle, which very much streamlines the process of looking at potential investments and returns and making those acquisitions. And then you can see the significant increase in the rate of return over the last 2 years with increases in the Fed funds rate. And so in July of 2022, we began adding certificates of deposit to the city's investment portfolio to begin to really use the eConnect Direct platform and begin to get all of our investment reporting and processes in place, really in an effort to anticipate a reduction in the Fed funds rate so that we could set up a scenario of having investments secured that would earn a higher rate of return for an extended period of time when the Fed fund rate falls and the rate on our deposits falls as well. This graph just gives you a pictorial of the eConnect Direct platform. This one is specific to certificates of deposit, but what Diane and I can do is we can go online, access the platform, put in specific search criteria of different products, and instantly see available investments in the market that we can purchase. We can do that order form right online, and we have duplicate authority so that if I initiate an investment, Diane has to approve that. And then we work with multi-bank securities to settle those through transfer to our Pershing Securities account, which is really the cash account that supports the maturities and settlements of new investments. What is particularly nice about this is that we have the option to go in and create default searches that will mirror our investment policy so that we don't see any investments that would not comply with our investment policy requirements. It's very efficient. As you know, we have been operating under a period of an inverted yield curve. Typically, what you will see in the investment market is higher returns with longer term investments. In October of 2022, the yield inverted where the 3-month T-bill rate was higher than the 10-year Treasury note. This is just from the U.S. Department of the Treasury website showing the yield curve in effect on December 18th. And we've been operating with this inverted yield curve since October of 2022, which really disincentivizes us from putting money into long-term investments at a lower rate than we can earn immediately. So to give you an idea of the portfolio, at December 31st, 2023, the city held just under $119 million in cash and investments. And again, that number is excluding the pension funds and the cemetery funds. And so the pie chart shows the distribution of how those funds are allocated. We had about 65%, $76.5 million in Lake Forest Bank and Trust, which was earning at December 31st 5.55% interest. We had about 27%, or just under $33 million, in Illinois Funds, which is an investment pool that will invest and manage the assets in accordance with their investment policy, which does conform to the city's. That was earning 5.46% as of December 31st. And we had 7% of that in certificates of deposit through the eConnect Direct platform. That was $8.24 million. Those were earning a range of 3.55 to 5.6. Those 3.55% returns were CDs that were purchased in mid to third quarter of 2022 before those Fed increases really sharply took an increase. And then about 1% or $1.4 million in other forms of operating cash, earning fairly minimal returns. This chart shows the $8.24 million in certificates of deposit at 12/31 to just show the maturity distribution. So this is something that's very easy to do as well on eConnect Direct, so that we can ladder our maturities and make sure that we have maturities scheduled over time, and that certainly addresses liquidity concerns. For interest, the hash mark that you see in some of those graph lines, those are callable certificates of deposit, whereas the solid are non-callable. So a callable certificate of deposit does have the risk of having that mature and called earlier than the maturity deadline. should rates rise or fall. The orange line that you see there is just one that was waiting to settle. We had purchased it in December, but it was going to settle in January, so it just highlights that that is awaiting settlement. So the first item that we want to review with the Finance Committee today is segmentation recommendations for 2024. So as part of these recommendations, what we did was we went through each individual operating fund in the city's budget, and we looked at the characteristics of that fund. Does it have reserve requirements? Is it in an increasing reserve pattern, or is it in a declining reserve pattern? How volatile are the revenues in that particular fund? And then provided a recommendation for those categories of how much of those available cash and investments in those funds we would recommend maintaining liquidity, therefore keeping in our cash accounts with the investment pool in Lake Forest Bank and Trust, and how much we would recommend putting in the core segment, which would be amounts available for investment purposes. And so you can see that the first category includes the general fund, which is the primary operating fund, the water operating fund, liability insurance fund, and the self-insurance fund. All of these funds have significant reserves maintained. And so we are intentionally maintaining a very high level of reserves. And so we recommend a 40% allocation of those cash and investments to the core segment available for investment. The next category are your capital funds. And we used in that context the 5-year forecast that was presented to you at the November budget workshop to see how we were anticipating those fund reserves being drawn down over the next 5 years. And for those funds, we recommend a higher liquidity segment of 80% and only 20% of those cash and investments available for investment. The emergency telephone fund is an outlier because that money is actually held by Glenview, and so we don't have authority over managing that money. The next group are other operating funds that have either a declining or limited fund balance reserves, and therefore we're recommending for those funds to remain 100% liquid, so no investment options in those funds. The next category is the Parks and Recreation Operating Fund, Special Recreation, Housing Trust, and Fleet Fund. Those are operating funds that have moderate reserve levels, not as significant as the General Fund or the Water Operating Fund, but fairly moderate reserve levels that we maintain over time. For that, we recommend 70% liquid, 30% core or investable. And then the final category are the Cemetery Fund, the Library Fund, which I'll speak to in just a moment, the Foreign Fire and Fire and Police Pension. These are funds that we budget and maintain in our financial statements, but we don't have direct authority over the investing of those funds. And so we've marked those as not applicable and out of range. I did designate the library, and I know Ishwar's here, because depending on what we end up doing with this, I would anticipate meeting with Ishwar to see we could certainly make this available to the library if their board wanted to invest some of their available cash in certificates of deposit or treasuries. We could provide that same opportunity to them at the library board's direction. So we could have further discussions about that. So with the segmentation recommendations that are outlined here, as of the amount at 12/31/23, the total available for investments would be $34.6 million of the $119 million. It's about 29% overall, compared to what we have of $8.2 million invested at December 31. So before I move on, I'm going to stop here because this one's an important slide and answer any questions or address any issues.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thanks. I appreciate this. So, I mean, you're basically wanting us to figure out if we're comfortable just with the allocation between liquidity and core, and you've aligned them by our funds. And so on the core, it's, I guess you're taking some duration, kind of longer duration. And is that reflected in the yield? I mean, do you feel comfortable that it would be put to work to have some more basis points of interest, or?
I think we absolutely would. It's certainly a balancing, and The goal is that, of course, if we're only investing 29%, then 71%, the rate on that is going to fall when the Fed fund rate falls, and we recognize that. But we're also recognizing that in many of these funds, we need to maintain the liquidity in those funds, and just looking to conservatively determine what portion of the total cash and investments we could very comfortably invest for a longer period of time and lock in a higher interest rate.
Sure. But all things equal, if you have the same yield, you would just want more liquidity, just by definition.
Correct.
So you are optimizing on those two variables.
Right.
Great. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, John.
Elizabeth, it looks like there's really no sense of urgency based upon what we see from the Lake Forest Bank and Trust account, the interest that we're getting for cash as opposed to investing the core at this time. Am I reading that the right way?
You're reading it the right way, except that when the Fed fund rate is reduced, we will see an immediate reduction in our earning rate. And so the goal is to have that lined up and try to manage that so that we can move into other vehicles at the optimal time.
Okay.
So that a portion of our portfolio can continue to earn a higher rate when the liquid cash is reduced.
But right now, they're about at par.
Right now, they're very competitive, yes.
What's your read on, I mean, you don't have a crystal ball like the rest of us, but what's your read on that in terms of the next 60, 90 days?
I wish I knew, but at the last Fed meeting, they did open the door to Fed rate reductions that they did for the first time begin to talk about being at the high and looking at potential rate reductions in calendar 24.
So given that dynamic, if at the end of last year we were at 8.2 million, and you're proposing or asking for approval to go up to 34, how would you think about deploying that over a period of time? Would it take 6 months, 3 months, 9 months?
I think it would take a full year
Oh, a
to
full
really
year.
get there
Yeah.
because the inverted yield curve is going to create a particular challenge in that we've got to determine how far we can go out strategically. And to be honest, we would certainly employ the assistance of multi-bank securities who do provide guidance to us as part of the eConnect Direct platform relationship in kind of modeling that and determining the most appropriate time.
Yeah, so that was my next question. On the investment advisor front, it's not from the Lake Forest Bank and Trust in terms of their wealth component. Through eConnect, you have somebody where you can model out some scenarios to kind of do these trade-offs and think about the allocation across liquidity and core, and they help
Yes.
facilitate that.
So, for example, as an eConnect Direct customer, we get frequent emails from multi-bank securities about the market, about the Fed meetings, about the guidance that they're giving their investment customers. And so we can leverage that, and we have a specific account client rep that we can work directly with.
Okay. Great. Any other questions for Director Holub on the segmentation recommendations for 2024? Okay.
So the second set of recommendations relate to the benchmarks for 2024. So these are listed, the 5 benchmarks that we are using currently. And so we have 3 liquidity benchmarks and 2 core benchmarks, really intended to provide a market comparison to what we are earning based on our general time frame for investments. And so we are recommending that we stick with the 5 that we're currently using. We think they're appropriate. We don't anticipate, for example, any of our core segment going significantly beyond 3 years, though we might have some exposure to investments longer than 3 years, but we feel that the benchmarks are appropriate and continue to be appropriate for 24. So to conclude, we would be looking for the Finance Committee to approve the segmentation recommendations, approve the benchmarks, or affirm the benchmarks for 2024. And then also to provide approval to pursue longer-term investments, also moving beyond certificates of deposit to treasuries and agency obligations in an effort to lock in higher yields beyond any Fed rate reductions that we experience in the next year. And I did want to include a note that the investment policy does specifically require Finance Committee Chair approval of any single investment purchase over $500,000. So we have, for example, in our certificates of deposit, we have only purchased FDIC insured certificates of deposit, so they've all been less than $250,000. And eConnect Direct ensures that we don't have any overlap or duplication of a CD with the same QSIP number. So we have a fully insured certificate of deposit portfolio at the current time. Be happy to answer any questions.
That's great. That's a key point. So on the core, you don't anticipate going farther than 3 years, is that?
I think we will have some, but I think that when you look at the aggregate, we're not going to have, for example, an average 5-year duration for our investment
Okay, so it's still an
portfolio.
appropriate benchmark.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Yes,
Director Hall,
Alderman Notes.
thank you. Are there any minimum investment ratings that we're permitted to invest in on government bonds?
There is, and the investment policy does specifically provide that rating criteria as well as for corporate bonds, commercial paper less than 3 years. So we
And
do have those.
What's that threshold? Do you
I'd
know?
have to look it up to be sure, but very high.
Good.
I'll follow up and provide that to you.
And so no junk bonds, right?
No junk bonds.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that'd be a good follow-up. It's a good question. And so you want us to vote now and give you guidance on these 3 recommendations?
Yeah.
Is that great? Okay. So should I ask for a motion? Or do you want to do them kind of one at a time, or how do you want to do it?
I think you could do them all together.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the segmentation recommendations and the benchmark recommendations for 2024? I see the mayor has a question, or do you? No? Okay, sorry. And,
Adding the investment strategy as well.
okay. And a motion to approve to pursue longer-term investment maturities and expand our investment portfolio beyond certificates of deposits with the goal to lock into a higher yield beyond any Fed fund reductions.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you so much. I will mention, if you can go back to the rate slide. And so the city does an amazing job on not only cash management, but also refinancing of our existing bonds. So that's the flip side of this curve. And so can you just tell everybody, I don't know, I think I've been on the council for almost 6 years. It's been 2 or 3 times since we've kind of gone through a formal kind of refi, or do you remember
At
the?
least 3
Yeah, at
in the
least
time
3.
I've been here, yeah.
And that's has saved us how much, do you think, in interest payments? $1 million plus?
Millions of dollars.
Yeah, so I just want to say that as well. So thank you for the hard work on the cash management side and keeping it safe and getting yield, but also refinancing our debt obligations, which in 9 years, we're going to be debt-free ostensibly if we don't issue more paper, which is fantastic as a city. So thank you, everybody that has been up here in the past. We really appreciate that, and to the staff and leadership. So thank you. All right. The next item are the FY25 water rates and water fund modeling project. For the water rate geeks in the world, these are some cool slides. So thank you, Elizabeth, for doing this work with our vendor, and take it away.
Absolutely. So just by way of background, you did not receive water rate recommendations in November as part of the fee schedule changes because we were still in the midst of implementing our water fund modeling with Waterworth. And so we said that we would come back in January, provide the update on our Waterworth implementation, and then provide a recommendation. So what we're looking from the Finance Committee for tonight is direction on the recommended rates, and if approved and based on your direction, we will bring a new fee schedule to the City Council in February for approval that will include the new fiscal year 25 water rates. So to give you a little bit of background, the water fund, which also includes sanitary sewer, is an enterprise fund. And by definition, an enterprise fund is totally self-supporting. So the rates charged for water and sanitary sewer are intended to cover all costs, operating, debt, and capital costs associated with the water and sanitary sewer utility. In Lake Forest, we have a combination of both fixed and variable rates for water and sanitary sewer. So we do have a fixed rate that's charged per quarter, and then we have variable rates based on the actual consumption in the billing period. We have tiered residential consumption rates. Those have been in effect for about maybe 8 years. We created a tiered residential consumption rate based on how much 1,000 gallons are used in a billing period. The first 10 are assessed a certain rate, then 11 to 60 are assessed a different rate, and then any consumption over 60,000 gallons in a billing period is charged a different rate. We, in our 5-year financial forecast for water and sanitary sewer, we assume that we will generate annual rate adjustments to increase revenue by 2.5% per year. That's intended to keep pace with personnel and other operating cost increases of the utility. And we don't want to have sporadic rate adjustments of significant amounts. We want to just stay constant and current with inflation. What we use in developing our water rate is a 5-year rolling average consumption. And so the two charts demonstrate that. I would call your attention first to the top right box, which by fiscal year reflects the actual consumed water in that fiscal year. So you see the fluctuation and differences from year to year in consumption of water for our fiscal years. What will tend to drive this is weather during the summer. So if we have a hot, dry summer like we did in the summer of 2012, that's going to drive consumption up. And for a long time, fiscal year 13, with that hot, dry summer of 2012, was the highest consumption we had had in a fiscal year for a considerable period of time. Then what you have in these green bars is you have actual numbers through 23, you have an estimate for 24, and then in the red bar, that's the 5-year average. So every year we move the 5 years out so that we're staying current and reflecting any changes in consumption of our customers. And so that red bar is simply the mathematical average of the most recent 5 years of consumption. We know that consumption is going to fluctuate from year to year, and so we feel that using that 5-year rolling average is a good measure for budgetary purposes. The bottom left chart shows what the rolling 5-year number was in the previous fiscal year budget. So what the 5-year rolling average consumption was, generating the particular rate recommended for that fiscal year. What you notice is that for years, we were seeing declines in consumption. And what that was doing was that was forcing our rate increases up at a higher rate because we had to compensate for the reduced consumption that we were seeing. The good news is that in recent years, we've seen increasing or steady 5-year averages of consumption. And so we really don't have to force rates up at a higher rate to generate that 2.5% revenue increase. Lots of numbers on this slide. What this is really intended to show is what our rate structure looks like. So in the top section, you see the fixed quarterly rates. These are water only. You don't have sanitary sewer on here. And the fixed quarterly rates for water are charged based on meter size. So if you have a small versus a medium versus a large meter, you're charged a different amount per quarter as a fixed rate. We did a lot of analysis several years ago to ensure that meter size was an appropriate predictor of usage. And that data came back showing that there was a clear indicator. And so the council was comfortable with that tiered rate structure for fixed rates. And then the bottom portion, the middle portion, are the consumption charges. You see the 3 different tiered residential charges based on the consumption tiers for residential customers, and then all other customers are charged the same rate for every 1,000-gallon unit they use in a particular billing period. The numbers in red signify changes so that you can easily see visually by fiscal year that we have tended to look at both the fixed and the variable rates for adjustment. And Alderman Tack will probably, or Mayor Tack will remember that we had a lengthy discussion when he was an alderman about this structure. And what we acknowledge is that about 90% of the water and sanitary sewer budget is fixed. You have to maintain your water plant 24/7, you have debt service, you have capital requirements, you have operating costs that aren't going to change significantly with the amount of consumption from year to year. But historically, traditionally, and industry-wide, there tends to be a significant focus on variable rate as the revenue-generating model. And so several years ago, we embarked on a multi-year plan to increase the proportion of our revenue generated by the fixed rate and less on the variable rate. At the time, we were generating only 99% of our revenue from the fixed rate, 91% from variable. And so we have made specific adjustments to our rate structure over time in an effort to increase the proportion of revenue generated from the fixed rate. So the fiscal year 25 proposed rates are shown there in the light blue column. We are recommending for fiscal year 25 only an adjustment to the fixed rate and quite nominal in charge. So simply an adjustment from $55 per quarter to $57 for small meters, $210 to $215 per quarter for medium meters, and large meters from $925 to $945. Ironically, while these rate increases look very small, because of the increased 5-year average of consumption and these small adjustments to the fixed rate, we can generate 2.5% increase in revenue next year. Here's simply the impact analysis, the estimated annual costs, and these amounts we are including amounts a customer would pay for water, sanitary sewer, and utility tax. So all of the water and sanitary sewer related charges on a quarterly utility bill in 4 different groupings: low usage residential, medium usage residential, high usage residential, and commercial, which are assessed the all other rate. In those, you can see that the dollar increase, these are annual changes, are very, very small, with only $8.40 projected for low and medium usage residential, and only $21 per year increase in high usage residential and commercial. However, we do project that we can increase the fixed rate as a percent of the total from 22.2 to 23.1. And so you can see we've made significant progress over the 9% when we started changing the structure of this. We are generally working towards a 25% fixed in our long-term modeling. So a logical question is, how do our rates compare with other comparable communities? We have become less and less able to really do a rate analysis with other comparable communities because we have a mixture. We have communities still charging 100% variable. We have some communities charging a fixed rate combination and using different methodologies. So what we did instead this year was we took the rate structures of each community and plugged it into our impact analysis for our customers here for this chart, to show if I use the same amount of consumption in any of these communities, what would I be paying in total for water, sanitary sewer, and utility tax? And so you see those comparisons on this pie chart. This chart is medium usage residential customers. And you can see green, Lake Forest is the green in the middle. And we appear here third of the communities that are shown. So we're remain very competitive in our rate structure compared to other communities. Also, to give you a little bit of additional information on the different color schemes, a solid bar, so as you see in the Arlington Heights, that's a solid line. They are charging 100% variable rate, so they have no fixed rate as part of their structure. The hashed lines, similar to Deerfield and Glencoe, and of course Lake Forest, have a combination of fixed and variable rates in their rate structure. And the color difference between blue and yellow or orange is that the yellow or orange also sell water to other customers. And so they are able to put their fixed costs of their utility over a larger, broader customer base. For example, in Highland Park, I believe they're still about 50-50. They're selling to their residents and 50% outside their city. And so they have a very significant proportion of outside customers that help them to have a much lower rate in their charges. Similar graph here with non-residential to compare customers that in Lake Forest are charged the same rate regardless of their consumption in a billing period. We are third here as well, although you can see that we are on non-residential even closer to number 2, Northbrook, when you look at the non-residential comparison. Moving to the water fund modeling project. So this is just an update. We'll provide additional information, I'm sure, at the March budget workshop, but in July of last year, the city manager approved a finance committee or finance director request to purchase the Waterworth system. This is an online application that allows you to do a lot of modeling for utilities. It's used for water, it's used for stormwater, it's used for electric, it's used for a lot of different utilities by municipalities across the country. And so for a fairly small investment, we were able to implement the Waterworth modeling. Just to give you an example of some of the things this does, this is revenue modeling. And so in these line charts, the orange, for example, represents our water charges, both fixed and variable. The brown, the very small brown piece at the bottom, is our sanitary sewer, fixed and variable rates, and then the small amounts of colors at the top are other revenue sources included in the city's water fund. You can see below that the input data, which we're able to go in. We can do either a dollar or percentage assumption, and where it's built on an assumption, that's a blue cell. But if we've entered a fixed amount, it's yellow, so we can very easily see where we're inputting based on an assumption versus actual data. And so that's how we can work on the revenue side. This is the expense side. So on this graph, we've got the dark blue is our operating costs. The light blue is debt service in any given year. The light green is capital expenses. And so we've plugged in a few previous years and then the draft 5-year capital plan as it was presented in November. And then starting with 2030 and beyond, we've put in a standard right now, $2.5 million, which is what our 5-year financial forecast calls for, but we can also include set adjustments in our capital tools. So the dark green line there is reflecting a modeling assumption that we would increase capital investment by $1 million from $2.5 to $3.5 million in the year 2030. And so that's adding that to the chart. The dotted lines going across, the red line is the operating fund balance target. So our prescribed target for cash and investment for reserve purposes. The black line is the total, because what's added there is the 1 million minimum reserve we have for the water capital fund. So it also gives you an ability to look very easily to see how your cash is impacted by the different inputs in the model. And then this allows us to kind of overlay everything to show revenues in the bars, expenses in the back, to kind of easily see in any given year where there's surpluses and deficits, along with the ongoing tracking of your reserve target. So we're really excited about this. It's been very great to work with them. They have made the implementation very easy. I think this is something that's going to be very useful to the city in its ongoing efforts to manage the water utility fund. And we'll probably have more information related to this to present to you at the March budget workshop. So with that, we have a recommendation for fiscal year 25 water rates for your referral to City Council for approval in February. I'll be happy to answer any
I
questions.
have a question. Can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
I was just curious on the modeling. Are they able to go back and model previous years as well? And do you have that data? And I just kind of wonder how healthy the enterprise fund is in general. And if you look at 25, 26, 27, am I correct in reading that, for some of those capital needs, we're probably going to have to take some money out of reserve in the general fund or the CIP to do that? Or how would you think about it being an awesome enterprise fund, standalone, able to do all the things that you said at the beginning of the presentation?
Yep. So the other line on this graph that you see this in gray, cash position, because that's not on this chart right now, is you would see a solid black line that would indicate the cash position at the end of each fiscal year. It's well above the minimum, so we have very significant reserves, intentionally similar to the general fund for the city. So we're very, very healthy. What we were not quite sure yet was what we were going to do with the capital planning, primarily the meter replacement. So as you'll recall, in November, we were looking at an $8 million investment over 3 years. We've been having additional discussions that will be part of our CIP update for you at the March budget workshop. And so that line changes depending on what our assumption is with the water meter replacement. And you'll also see that this model is indicated as no borrowing. So our first model in Waterworth is assuming that we do the full meter replacement from the water fund. But you'll recall in November, we talked about a potential loan from the general fund if necessary in year 3 of the project. And so we can we can copy that and create a second scenario that then has that loan included. And so that's what we'll need to finalize and present in March. But very healthy. The actual cash position is well above the target.
Okay, great. And the water tastes good too.
And the water's great.
I've been really happy with it. So, any questions for Elizabeth on the rates or the rate structure? I think, are you comfortable with fixed and variable at this time? You say approaching 25, and because so much of our costs are fixed, do you think that's a nice balance and fair and equitable? Okay, great. All right. Well, do I have a motion to approve our FY25 water rates recommendations?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's great. All right, we're almost done. We got to get under an hour here. The other business is the next item, the flash report. Elizabeth, can you just stay up there real quick and just tell everybody where they can get access to the flash report online on our website? And,
Sure. So if you're enrolled in the weekly e-news that you get on Friday afternoon, when we release a new version of the monthly flash report, there's a nice link included in there that you can go directly to the flash report. Otherwise, there's a little bit of digging on the website, but if you do go to the financial transparency area of the city's website and go to interactive charts and graphs, there's a list there of all the versions of the flash report that you can look at and see. But the easiest is probably that link that we provide in the e-news each time we release a new monthly flash report.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions on the 2 exceptions on the fee reduction or the waivers granted in excess of 1,000? Any issues with that? Okay. Any questions on the organizational performance measures for the FY25? I think those were, just very well done. Anyone have any comments or issues from the packet on those? On the 5-year.
We'll note for the council that as we begin the strategic planning process in the coming months, this might look a little different next year, but it's an exciting process for us. And I think to Elizabeth's credit and the rest of the staff, where they really do a remarkable job of tying resource allocation in the budget to goals identified in our long-term planning document. So we'll see what it looks like as we go through that process and going into next year's budget cycle.
Okay. That's great. Always fun to do a new strategic plan. And thank you for the update on the 5-year capital improvement plan in terms of our March budget workshop. And then, Jim, you want to come on up and talk about the innovation and technology 5-year plan? Jim Shaw, our innovation director, I always like to give him a plug for all his hard work. Does a great job, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the 5-year plan, or I can give you a kind of an overview.
Yeah, I think a brief overview. Yeah, just.
Diane, quick question. Do we have this in the packet? Is it available?
It's not on the slide.
Oh, okay.
It's the last page of their packet.
Last page of your packet. I hope you have access to that.
Yeah.
Page 30.
So technology is a difficult item to project. So putting together a 5-year plan, it requires a lot of flexibility. We know where we want to be a year from now. Technology is a fast-changing animal. So we have, it's difficult to do a 5-year plan. But what we've tried to do here is put significant items from our budget in the matrix so you have a better understanding of where we're going. Okay? Now, I'll touch on a few of them that are larger items. Top line, you'll see one for facilities access systems control. This is really bringing our buildings up to date as far as security. These are doors, new fob systems for all of the doors on certain buildings, especially buildings that get a lot of public traffic. It works with an automated camera system, also provides remote access for public safety, and provides immediate lockdown for managers or employees within that building. So if there is an incident, we can lock the building down. We can lock segments of the building down. And public safety would have access to cameras within that building to have a better understanding of what's going on. So it's a nice new system, a lot of functionality. We're planning on for the rec for 25, and then we would proceed with City Hall and MS following. Another item I might want to highlight, it's not sexy, but our phone system is approximately 11 years old at this point in time. It's at end of life, so we will be targeting that for replacement. There are some new features around phone systems today, and we're going to explore those. We're not going to get too far from the mainstream. We want something that's reliable and functional, of course, but we're going to look at some of the newer technologies. Virtual machine replacement is another item on your list here for $150,000. These are really, this is our server matrix, our server systems that live within our network. That virtual machine represents approximately 35 different sessions or applications running, and it is in need of a replacement. And then we have a operating capital line item at the bottom. Mostly this is for replacement of older equipment, PCs, switches, servers. We do have an important line there which labeled cybersecurity initiatives. And we had a discussion with Elizabeth. This is not a true capital item. It's more of an operating item, but we wanted to make you aware that we do have a focus in this area. There have been communities that have been hit recently by ransomware. We are quite confident in our network infrastructure, our configuration, our operations, but we want to make sure that we are prudent, and we will be looking at doing an assessment this year, bringing a third party in, a consultant in to review our configuration and operations and making recommendations. Those are some of the highlights of the budget. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about
Thank you.
individual items.
Any questions for Director Shaw? I think that's great. Really appreciate your hard work. I think the audit every year does a little bit of the cyber.
We're going to have that
vulnerabilities as
this week. We're making our presentation Thursday. Joe Gabansky will be making that presentation.
Great. Well, thank you for the hard work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions on that? No? Great, okay. Opportunity for the public to address the Finance Committee. Anybody brave the cold?
Actually, I do have a question.
Yes, Alderman Notes.
Curiosity, how does our budget look this year?
Who's the question directed to?
Jim?
Jim?
Yeah,
To Jim?
Thank you, Jim.
Dr. Shaw? Yeah.
Jim Lockerbie or Jim Shaw?
Shaw, I'm sorry, thank you.
On what component of
Yeah,
the?
just curious, so looking at the budget for fiscal year '25, just over 500,000, how does that compare to, say, what it was this past fiscal year?
I think that's fairly consistent.
Okay.
So we've worked with finance and we've established, I think, an operating budget of roughly 200,000 on an annual basis to replace current equipment and systems. And then we have a margin roughly of 300,000 a year to explore new systems or new technologies.
Right. Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, yeah, no. Every business or government is a technology business or government, right? With all the changes, so it's money well spent. Anyone from the public to brave the cold to come to speak in front of this Finance Committee, please come forward. Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We'll see you 5 minutes for the city council meeting. Adjourn.
Great job.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 16th, 2024 session of the Lake Forest City Council. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Certainly. Honorable Mayor Tack. Alderman Novin is absent. Alderman Waldeck.
Present.
Alderman Notes.
Here.
Alderman Powers.
Here.
Alderman Preschlack.
Here.
Alderman Gushgarian.
Here.
Alderman Weber.
Here.
Alderman Walder.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is comments by mayor. I'd like to start by taking a minute to recognize the many city staff who were working in front of and behind the scenes during the recent storm. Members of public safety, the snow operations team made up of staff from public works, building maintenance, fleet, forestry, parks, streets, sanitation, and water and sewer sections. I am, and I'm sure you are, continually impressed at the high level of service that this city provides its residents. In fact, there's a recent story on the city's blog about how the city is leveraging technology to streamline snow operations. If you're interested, you can find it at lakeforestlove.com. The next item that I would like to address relates to the issue of suburban migrant drop-offs. I'm bringing this up because over the past month or so, this has been the #1 issue that I've had email concerning. Over the past several months, numerous residents have contacted me with concerns about the potential for migrant drop-offs in Lake Forest. As most of you are aware, this has occurred in numerous suburban communities subsequent to the City of Chicago actions restricting migrant arrivals. In response, numerous communities have responded with their own ordinances in an effort to stem migrant arrivals. In Lake Forest, the senior staff and I have been in constant communication regarding developments in the matter. We have reviewed neighboring community ordinances and discussed the situation with our legal counsel. It is our policy to take action and enact ordinances only when we believe that our actions will address the problem with reasonable efficacy and our ordinances will withstand appropriate legal scrutiny. We do not confuse activity with effective action. The City of Lake Forest has plans in place and is ready to implement them, should circumstances dictate. At present, these plans do not include proposals to enact new ordinances. We will, however, continue to monitor the situation closely and act appropriately if indicated. At this time, in fact, I'm going to defer this part. I'd like to ask the city manager to address this issue in his comments. We'll move on to the next item for the mayor, and then I will sort of move to you and ask you to address that. The next item is approval of board and commission appointments and reappointments. Tonight, I would like we are appointing Vince Sparrow, and that is to the library board. I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the appointment of Vince Sparrow to the library board.
So moved. Second.
Is this a voice vote? Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That being said, the motion carries. The next item is comments by city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council. Good evening. Not a whole lot to add to your comments, Mr. Mayor. I think that was articulated quite well, but I certainly do want to echo your comments and assure the council and the community that city staff are well prepared to deal with a variety of hypothetical scenarios regarding unscheduled migrant bus drop-offs that are occurring in various suburbs throughout the region. As is sort of customary when discussing operational law enforcement planning, I won't go into a lot of details regarding those plans tonight, but do want to assure everyone that the staff has put a lot of time and thought into how to address those scenarios were they to occur. In addition to that, our police department is actively engaged in extensive regional intelligence sharing, so they have a very good idea as to what is happening on a daily basis in other communities throughout the region, responses that have worked well, areas where maybe things could have been handled a little differently. And so while I won't go into all the specifics on how we would address an unscheduled bus arrival were it to occur, I certainly can state at a high level that our efforts would be focused on ensuring transportation access to incoming migrants to facilities down in the city of Chicago where they can receive access to some of the resources and services that they need. And it really is a simple matter. We as a community don't have the capacity or infrastructure to provide any of those resources, but we're prepared to ensure people can access those down in the city of Chicago. Beyond that, I think you pretty well articulated staff's position and concurrence on the need to take legislative action at this time. We wouldn't recommend it as well. Based on our observations throughout the region, I think it's fair to say there's simply no evidence at this point that local ordinances are in any way effectuating decisions on where buses are arriving or not arriving. And as you said, local ordinances, even if well-intentioned, can bring with them a host of unintended consequences, certainly things we've discussed at a staff level and in consultation with our legal counsel. So, in closing, I will just say that we recognize it's a fluid situation. We're always prepared to adapt in our response based on changing circumstances, but at this point in time, we're very confident in our ability to manage the situation based on current plans, and if and when that ever changes, we'll be sure to keep the City Council and the community apprised. And if there are no questions or comments, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I have no other report this evening.
Are there any questions for City Manager? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is opportunity for citizens to address the City Council. Are there any citizens that would like to address the City Council at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item, which is committee reports, of which there are none. Next item on the agenda is items for omnibus vote consideration. If there's any item that the alderman would like removed or taken separately, please let me know. There are 11 items tonight. Item number 1, approval of the December 4th, 2023 City Council meeting minutes. Number 2, approval of the check register for the period of November 25th through December 31st, 2023. Number 3, approval of a resolution amending the authorized signers for the golf course operating bank account. Number 4, consideration of a request to waive the fidelity bond requirement in connection with holding a raffle in the city of Lake Forest for the School of St. Mary. Approval by motion. Number 5, award of a design service agreement to 845 Design Group for continued improvements and upgrades to the public safety building in the amount of $34,400 to include a contingency in the amount of $2,600 for a grand total amount of $37,000. Number 6, ratification of an emergency purchase of a police patrol vehicle approved by the city manager to DeOrazio Ford of Wilmington, Illinois, in the amount of $46,959.26. Number 7, approval to waive the bid process and approve the purchase of a replacement senior center 14-passenger bus to Midwest Transit Equipment Incorporated in the amount of $111,625. We seem to have had some driving issues in the recent month. Number 8, approval of a purchase of a replacement rear load refuse truck to Truck Center Companies, the chassis, in the amount of $213,672, and McNellis Truck Manufacturing, the body, in the amount of $135,134 for a grand total cost of $348,806. Number 9, consideration of a waiver of permit fees related to the renovations and upgrades of the barn house on the Ragdale campus at 1260 North Green Bay Road. Approval by motion. Number 10, consideration of an ordinance approving a recommendation from the Building Review Board, first reading, and if desired by City Council, final approval. And finally, number 11, consideration of an ordinance approving a recommendation from the Zoning Board of Appeals in support of a setback variance at 1055 Beverly Place, first reading, and if desired by the City Council, final approval. Are there any items that the alderman would like to have removed or taken separately? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve the 11 omnibus items as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All right, this is a roll call vote.
Alderman Waldeck.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
Alderman Freshlack.
Aye.
Alderman Vanderkeeren. Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walder.
Aye.
7 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. The next item is old business, of which there is none this evening. Next item, new business, of which there is none this evening. And the final item, oh, are there any comments by aldermen? No. Okay. At this time, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn into executive session pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2 parentheses C, parentheses 11, pending litigation, and parentheses 5, purchase or lease of real property for the use of public body, and parentheses 6, disposition of property and the consideration for the sale or lease of property owned by the public body.
So moved.
Second.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
Alderman Preschlack.
Aye.
Alderman Gushgarian.
Aye.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walder.
Aye.
Alderman Waldeck.
Aye.
7 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. At this time, we'll be adjourning into executive session. I would like to note that there will be no further business following the executive session.